Hi everyone, welcome to block 5 of the 2020 quilt. So today we're going to be adding a new element which I like to call the angled rectangle. It's taking a rectangle shape and then chopping off one of the corners by adding a square onto it to give you a different shape. Further on down, sometimes it can be an angled square or an angled triangle. Anytime the word angle is used, it's mean we're going to be using this technique to kind of chop off one of the corners. So as you can see, this block, we're going to be starting by making that same pinwheel that we did from block 2. So that's looking like this. I already have it made up. For those of you who may be starting with block 5 for some reason, if you go back to the block 2 video, we talk about making the half square triangles and then turning them into a pinwheel. So you can use whatever method you want to make these half square triangles and make your pinwheel block. The next thing we're going to be doing is making these angled rectangle blocks. And that's going to be working with a rectangle and a square. So I've taken my square and I've drawn my line corner to corner. And then I'm going to be laying this square right sides together on top of my rectangle. And this time I want to sew directly on the line. I do not want to sew on either side of it. I'm going to be sewing exactly on top of that line. Now, one thing I want to make sure is you have to pay attention as to which direction you place this block. Okay, so you have to look at your pattern. If I laid it like this and I sewed this direction, when I go to open it up, it's not going to be orientated in the correct way to go with my pattern. So again, always double check, lay your block down, look at which direction I want that to angle, and then place your block on top. Okay, so there's my rectangle with my square, and I've sewn right on my line. Now I'm going to iron this open. So here is my angled rectangle. So here are my 4 angled rectangles that I need for this project. And again, sometimes as you're sewing, things wobble a little bit. So I always like to double check, one, to make sure that I have my pieces going in the right direction. And then if I need to square up, it's a little bit easier to flip it over and square up from the back because I know that this rectangle is the exact size that I want, even if my little square, when I put it on, shifted a little bit. So I can always come back if things aren't exact, place my ruler right along my rectangle shape and just trim off anything to make sure that it's all nice and even, okay? So I would do that first, and then I can come back, and if I want to cut some of this extra bulk out of here, I can, okay? Some people like to only cut out the middle section and leave the part of the rectangle again as a reference, but I felt I sewed close enough that I can cut away both of them. But that's an option, whichever you feel best for your project that you're working on. Okay. So once I have my 4 angled rectangles, I'm going to be bringing my pinwheel back. And the first thing I need to do is sew a rectangle to the top and a rectangle to the bottom. And I'm going to be matching up my colors with my little squares that I added on. So I'm kind of creating that secondary little pinwheel. And then for my 2 sides, before I can sew them on, I need to take my 4 little background squares. I need to sew them on to this unit to make that little strip set. So I'm going to have this unit and my 2 side units. I'm then going to sew those 3 together into a block, and I'm going to square my block up to 8.5 inches. So again, here is my original red and white colorway. And then I also had my colorway with my 12 fet quarters. And this was my scrappy colorway. I hope you have fun with this one, and we'll see you next time.